these were based off, the trig functions are based off a point x, y on the terminal side. And we talked about x, y, and r, kind of like a triangle. This would be your x, this was your y, and r is that hypotenuse. So by Pythagorean theorem, r is the square root of x squared plus y squared. And then our definitions. So this is sine of theta. You always have to have the angle, is y over r. Cosine of theta was x over r. Tangent of theta was y over x. And then we had reciprocals. So cosecant, I try to remember cosecant goes with the sine, so it's got that s in the middle, is r over y. Secant, reciprocal cosine, r over x, and then cotangent, reciprocal tangent, so x over y. So what we're going to do today is I'll give you a point and we will find all of these trig functions. So we'll just need to get the x, y, and r and then work from there. So if this says the terminal side of an angle theta in standard position passes through the point 12, 5. So if you're writing this down, all you really need to jot down, you need your order pair. And we need the values of all 6 trig functions. Before we can do ratios, we have to have x, y, and r. Just as a note, we will want these to be exact values. So even when we find like sine of theta, it's y over r, I don't want you to give me a decimal, I just want a fraction in lowest terms. If r doesn't turn out to be a nice number, we know it's a square root, I want you to keep it as a radical in lowest terms, don't turn it into a decimal, just because that throws off the accuracy of our answers. So what is my x here? 12. Or pair x, y. The y is 5. And we said yesterday r is the square root of x squared plus y squared. Square root of 169, which is 13. So I have my x, y. So for your answer, I want the values of the 6 trig functions. So you have to say sine of angle theta. That was the name of the angle given. So the definition of sine is y over r. So my answer is 5 over 13. Okay, you don't necessarily have to write the y over r piece. I'm just showing you where I'm getting my answer from. And if I know sine, what other one do I automatically know? What's the reciprocal of sine? So cosecant is 13 over 5. Just flip that. Cosine of theta is x over r. So that would be 12 over 13. What's the reciprocal of cosine?
Secant.
So secant of theta is 13 over 12. Tangent of theta is y divided by x. So 5 over 12. So the reciprocal of tangent is,
Cotangent.
which would be 12 over 5. want to kind of talk through another option. So we have to have X, Y, and R because sometimes if we're looking at a picture, we can't really draw a triangle, but sometimes we can. If you were to plot the point 12, 5, X is positive and Y is positive, so it would be like here. And you could form a triangle from that. Okay, my X side was 12, my Y is 5, and then Pythagorean theorem, 12 squared plus 5 squared equals R squared, and that we would get the 13. So the other trick was SOHCAHTOA. So it tells us the SOH says sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So from here, the opposite side is directly across from it, which is 5. The hypotenuse is this longest side here, so 13, and we get the 5 over 13 again. Cosine, this means adjacent over hypotenuse. So this has to be my hypotenuse. This is the opposite because it's directly across. The side touching my angle that is not my hypotenuse is my adjacent. So adjacent over hypotenuse is 12 over 13, which was cosine. Tangent, opposite over adjacent, so 5 over 12. And then you can do reciprocals for the other 3. So a couple different options. Some people like to draw a picture. Some people just write out X, Y, and R. It is up to you. I don't have a preference as long as you can tell me what those ratios are. Can you guys try one? So X is 8, Y is -6. Get R, it's the square root of X squared plus Y squared. 64 plus 36, so square root of 100, which is 10. So sine Y over R, so -6 over 10. Go ahead and put it in lowest terms, so that's -3/5. So then the reciprocal is cosecant is -5/3. Cosine Y over R, so -6/10, or sorry, X over R, so -8/10, which is 4/5. So that means secant would be 5/4. Tangent Y over X, so -6 over 8 is -3/4. So cotangent theta would be -4/3. Is that okay? In terms of if you had chosen to draw a picture, what quadrant would the point 8, -6 be in? Over 8, down 6, so that would put it in quadrant 4. Your angle is from this x-axis here. So my x was +8, my y was -6. You could find your hypotenuse again and do SOHCAHTOA as well, if that worked for you. Any questions on that one? Okay. Let's look at this example. So this one's a little bit different. I'm still asking for the values of the 6 trig functions, but I'm telling you not a point on the terminal side. I'm giving you an equation for the terminal side. I'll give you a second to jot that out. If you're thinking in terms of a picture, okay, we know here's the initial side. If this is my terminal side, does it matter which point I pick on this terminal side? Okay, if I picked this point down here, my x, y, and r would be based off of this triangle. If I pick this one, then I get a bigger triangle. So my x, y, and r are different. If I go here, my x, y, and r are different. So every one of us could pick a different point on this line, and we would have different x, y, and r values. But what kind of triangles are these? What's true about it? They're all right triangles. Do they have the same angle measurements? Yes, so they're similar triangles. Remember when we talked about similar triangles, we said their sides are proportional. So it doesn't matter which point you pick on that side, all of us could do something different, but since they're proportional, they would reduce to the same value. So we will get the same final answer for sine and cosine. So what we have to do is just find some point that meets this requirement. Okay? Start with the inequality I gave you. I told you that x had to be less than or equal to 0. We don't want to pick 0 because that would be the same as the vertex, and that's not going to give us much information. But we could do anything else as long as it is less than 0. So maybe if I made my x, let's say -1, and you don't have to jot all this down yet unless you want to. I want to kind of talk through what might be an easier point versus a more difficult one. If I plug in a -1 for my x, and then I have to find out my y. So I get -2y equals 3, and y is -3/2. Okay, that's an option. It's a point on the line. Is it pretty? Not really. Why?
Because it's a negative and a fraction.
Yeah, we've got that fraction. We're not going to be able to do much about the sign. It kind of is what it is. But the fraction, it gets a little more difficult when you're finding your r and you have fractions, and then think when we do y over r, we'll have a fraction divided by a fraction. It's not impossible. We can deal with fractions. You have dealt with fractions all your life, so it's not the end of the world. But if you're trying to make life easy for yourself, this may not be the best point. Can you think of a different x value that might make it easier? -2. All right, let's try -2. So I'm plugging that in to find my y. So I get y to be -3. That's much nicer. So let's go with that point. An easy way to find that, you know, the first time we did it, we had -1 and -3/2. I didn't have to necessarily rework it all. You could have just said, okay, this one's over 2, so I'm going to multiply both of these numbers by 2. And that gives us the -2 and the -3. So if you don't pick great the first time and you get a fraction, you can adjust. Just multiply both of them by your denominator to get a nicer point that's not a fraction. All right, so now we need r. So we know r is the square root of x squared plus y squared. So we get the square root of 13. Can we reduce that? No, it does. There's no perfect square, so we're going to leave it. Now, if you had something like the square root of 8, I do expect you to write it in lowest terms, so you break it into 2 radical 2, but 13 is prime, it doesn't reduce at all. So now let's do our trig functions. Sine. Definition of sine is y divided by r. So y is -3, r is radical 13. I can't leave that for my final answer. Why? Yeah, we know from algebra we don't like radicals on the bottom, but it's an easy fix. You just multiply the radical on top and bottom. So we get -3 radical 13 over 13. Okay, cosecant. That's the reciprocal of sine. You can do the reciprocal of your final answer, but then it's just going to move your radical back down. It's just r over y. When you're doing reciprocals, it's easier to do the reciprocal of it before you flip, or before you get the radical off the bottom. So if I just flip this, I get negative radical 13 over 3. Cosine is x over r. So x is negative 2, r is radical 13, but we know we've got to move that radical. So I get negative 2 radical 13 over 13. Secant, the reciprocal of cosine, what would that be? And it doesn't matter if you put the negative on the bottom or out in front or on top, they're all the same. Tangent is y over x. So negative 3 over negative 2. Negatives drop and we just get 3 over 2. So cotangent is x over y, or just flip that and we get 2x. Any questions on that? I'm going to stop there today. And I want to give you guys time to work. Let's see. I think and I do want to talk about one of these sections. So when you get to 26 through 44, it's going to tell you you have a point in the indicated quadrant and decide if the ratio is positive or negative. So I'm going to do problem 25 for you. I'm going to show you later. So it's going to say quadrant 2, x divided by r. Okay, if you think about points in your quadrants, in quadrant 1, x is positive and y is positive, right? In quadrant 2, just from algebra, your x would be and y is
Positive.
Quadrant 3, x is,
Negative.
y is,
Negative.
quadrant 4, x is,
Positive.
y.
Negative.
Okay, so if we're in the second quadrant, my x is positive, or sorry, x is negative, because we're in the second. R is always positive, no matter what, because r is equal to a square root, so that would be a positive. If you take a negative divided by a positive, what's your final answer? Negative. So you are not giving me a number answer on these, you're just deciding is it positive or negative. That's all you're doing.